I think what I wanted to do, and maybe this, if it helps you, I'd like to just talk about 5 or 6, 7, maybe 7 subjects real quickly, and then really I'd like to just answer your questions after that. First of all, you might have noticed that my office quit issuing press releases. And I wanted to tell you why and tell you how you can get that same information. And the reason why is I've been sued several times over the last couple of years. I have 2 lawsuits going right now for defamation of character. And what the court has said is that I have, as legislative auditor, I have legislative immunity for my reports. But they don't consider the press releases to be within that report. Now, we argued that the legislative auditor reports its findings in many, many different ways, and that, we do it through, as I'm doing today, through speeches, we do it through talking before the legislature, we do it through the written report, and we do it through press releases, but the court didn't go with that. And so the very same thing that you used to see as a press release is now like page 1 of every report. So if you just get the report, open it up, look at the first page, or click down and look at the first page, it's basically the same thing that we used to have as a press release, but now it's inside the report. That work? Now, let me tell you about those 2 defamation cases that have been going on. One of them is David Lacerte. You might remember Mr. Lacerte. He was the head of Veterans Affairs, and we issued a report on that department, and he sued me personally and sued the office for defamation of character. And just recently, that case was the judge awarded in favor of the legislative auditor. I assume we'll be having appeals in the future. The second case was an organization called HEAL out of New Orleans, Health Education Authority, Louisiana, and the individual, Jacob Johnson, has also sued for defamation of character. And here's the point I'd like to make about all of that. My office, and I think you know this, my office we have a tremendous system of making sure our reports are accurate. And we have review upon review upon review, and we have great quality control, and I can pretty much guarantee you reports do not go out with any glaring errors. I'm not going to tell you there's not a misspelling or something like that, but there's, when it comes to the facts of what we're saying, it's the facts, and so we'll stand behind that. The second thing I wanted to tell you about real quickly is the legislative auditor's budget. So my budget is about $34 million a year. We were funded in a couple different ways, primarily through the general fund funding of about $8 million, and then the rest of it is self-generated. So we bill the entities that we audit. Now, in 2015, my general fund funding was about $10 million. It got reduced back then to $8 million level, and it's still at the $8 million level, even though costs have gone up and the workload has increased. And I want to just maybe mention real quickly, because this is what I told the legislature this year, and they did not increase my general fund funding as I had asked. I asked for $2 additional million to get me back to the 2015 level. And the reason is this, that I use that to do the actuarial work that we're all very familiar with. Every retirement bill has to have an actuarial note. My office employs the actuaries that do that work. All the local government work, and I know some of you have asked me today about some of the work we've done in local government. All that local government work is paid for with general fund funding. There's no one to bill for that work. Investigations, my fraud investigations, it's not likely that an entity is going to pay me to go and investigate them, right? Especially when it comes to fraud. And so those kind of things is all done with general fund funding. And as that funding has decreased and as all the costs go up and the demands go up, it's crowding it out. And so I'm just going to be able to do less of it in the future. So hopefully next year we can get that straight. Third thing I want to talk to you about, I know I was asked previously to speak about this, is House Bill 72. House Bill 72 was Representative Tony Bacala filed the bill this year. And what it would have done, it would have given my office the ability to use income tax data, state income tax data, in the audit of a Medicaid program. So I am required to audit the Medicaid program. Medicaid program is over 1/3 of our revenue of our states, 41% of our expenditures of our state. It is a huge program. It is, since 2013, since the Affordable Care Act, the primary determinant of someone going into Medicaid for a big population of Medicaid is income. Not only income, but it is modified adjusted gross income, which is a tax number. And so it has been my contention that in order to properly audit this number, I need tax data to do so. Now let me tell you, it's not just my contention, it is the auditors from all the state auditors from all around the country that have that same issue and the same opinion. And last year I had to disclaim on, which is basically saying I cannot give an opinion on the eligibility portion of the Medicaid program because I don't have the data to do a proper audit of it. So you might ask, well, do other states have access? And here's the issue. Right now, as I understand it, about 7 of the other state auditors around the country do have access to their tax information. So it's something that's being corrected right now. You can't hardly ask us to do the audit when we don't have the information to actually do the audit. We're also working on federal legislation because we'd like to address this at the federal level if possible rather than having to address it in 50 different states. And so myself and 2 other state auditors, we have testified on the Hill a few times in D.C. We've spoken to CMS, we've spoken to the IRS Tax Advocacy Office, and we're working with some reps and some senators up there in D.C. right now to try to get a bill that would have a possibility of getting through the federal process. Somebody recently said that my desire to use tax information to audit the Medicaid program, that I was somewhat being nitpicky. And I want to kind of explain something to you. The Medicaid program in our state is, by and large, not a fee-for-service system anywhere now. We are a managed care system, which means that every enrollee, we pay out 100% of our obligation, regardless of whether they ever go see a doctor, ever go get a prescription filled, ever go to receive any services. The state of Louisiana still pays out 100%. So every individual enrolled costs us 100%. So it makes eligibility extremely important. Wages and household size is the key determinant on eligibility. So we have to be able to look at household size, and we have to be able to look at their wages or their incomes. Now, I also have access to workforce commission data. So we can kind of bounce the eligibility up against workforce commission data, but that tells a very small piece of the picture. And let me explain why. Wage data is what workforce commission has. So if you work at Walmart or you work for the state of Louisiana, your employer is reporting your wages to the Workforce Commission data for the purpose of unemployment insurance. But that doesn't include self-employment, it doesn't include rent and royalties, it doesn't include retirement income, it doesn't include several types of income that certainly an individual can have. Well, you might say, well, then Medicaid recipients, Daryl, wouldn't tend to have those types of income. And I might kind of agree with you on that typically we probably wouldn't find Medicaid recipients having large value. And that's the issue. I'm the auditor, and I'm supposed to be determining whether people are on Medicaid who should not be on Medicaid. And so in order for me to do that, I need the whole picture. And I know we might find it hard to believe, but I testified before the legislature a couple of years ago that we went out and we did some samples and we did some testing, and we saw an individual that had an income of over $300,000 that was on Medicaid for that full year. We had other instances of well over $100,000. You probably are familiar with the Department of Revenue through the task force, the Medicaid fraud task force that I chair. The Department of Revenue did a test for us, compared the enrollment up against the tax data for 2017, and they reported roughly 1,700 individuals that had an income of greater than $100,000. Well, it's really hard to be eligible for Medicaid if you have an income over $100,000, right? So I don't find it nitpicky. What I find is that in order for the auditor's office to do its work, we need this data, and I believe eventually we'll rectify that. But until then, myself as state auditor, and I can tell you state auditors all around the nation this year will be disclaiming on the opinion of their Medicaid programs as a result of that. And I don't think CMS is going to put up with that for too long until they want something done about it. The Department of Health did or has made some changes over the last few years based upon recommendations that my office has made. One of the things that we said that they should do is take their enrollment data and compare it against wage data on a quarterly basis. Don't wait till annual re-enrollments and that type of thing, but do it quarterly. And you've seen here recently they took 47,000 individuals off the rolls as a result of that. The CMS let me tell you why this is all a problem, or why it's really on my radar. CMS has told us, or through reports through the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, that Medicaid will increase in cost for the state 6.1% over the next 10 years, 6.1% per year over the next 10 years. And so that makes it really important for us. The other thing you've seen here recently is the Department of Revenue, my task force and myself as state auditor, we asked them to do a comparison. In 2017, I asked them to do this comparison. They did it for the 2016 tax year. And what it resulted in is about 85,000 individuals that were on Medicaid in 2016. They had an income per their tax return that differed from their Medicaid application by 20,000 or more. Now that would kind of indicate that their income was wrong on their Medicaid application. Doesn't necessarily say that they were not qualified, but more work would need to be done on that. So about a year ago, through the task force and myself, I asked the Department of Revenue again to do that same test, but do it for the 2017 data, to 2017 tax year. They originally put off the test till sometime during November, so we could get all the tax returns in and all the extensions finished and all that sort of thing. But you probably saw in February the department said they could not give me that data because they didn't believe the law permitted the department to provide that data to the task force or to the auditor. I have always maintained and continuously believe that there are exceptions in the law. The law is Title 47-1508, and there are exceptions in the law. And one of those exceptions is statistical data. And all we were asking for was statistical data, and I still maintain that that meets that exception. So what I did was I went out and asked the Attorney General. I said, can you opine? Am I right or am I wrong? The Attorney General opined, no, you're right, Auditor. It's a statistical data, and they can give you that data. But to date, the Department of Revenue continuously says they can't give me the data. So what I've done since then is I filed a motion for declaratory judgment in the courts, asking the court, just simply give me, that's all I'm asking. All I'm looking for is, what's the answer? Can I get the data or can I not get the data? We feel like to do the audit of the state Medicaid program, we need that data or that statistical information. And so that's why you've seen my office file a lawsuit against the Department of Revenue. Along the front of Medicaid, my office has also, we've been developing a Medicaid audit unit for, I guess 3 years now. And we're getting better, and we're perfecting it, and we're hiring the right people, and it takes us some serious and advanced data analytics to do a proper job of auditing the Medicaid program. And so we are now developing those analytics and beginning to be able to pinpoint providers that certainly looks like those providers are engaged in fraud. And also those recipients, that it appears those recipients do not qualify for the program. And so I'm involved in several investigations right now of providers working alongside AG Landry. And also we have launched about 50 recipient fraud cases right now that my office is working in conjunction with the Attorney General Landry. Also, and in hopes that we can begin to bring some of that to conclusion and justice and deter those in the future from committing those type of frauds. You might have seen today, my office issued a report on misclassified employees. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go out and get it and read it. A misclassified employee is an individual who their employer calls them a contract laborer, but really they're an employee. And there's laws that tell you when a person's an employee and when they're not. Mainly it has to do with control. If you control their hours, their time, and what they do, then they're an employee. But we issued a report because we wanted to go out and look at how pervasive is this problem in Louisiana. And I think we probably all know it's very pervasive in some industries, for example, in the construction industry. And what we reported is that between 2014 and 2018, that the sample that we looked at, the numbers that we were able to come up with, it appears that the employers failed to pay $3 million in unemployment tax and $9 million in state income tax. Now that's of what we looked at. You might have seen several years ago, Lee Zurich did a report on this out of New Orleans, and he calculated it somewhere near $250 million. We couldn't quite get to that, but we do see it as a serious problem. And we also see that the Louisiana Workforce Commission really needs to upgrade its processes, for example, on audits. They're auditing employers to make sure these employers are classifying employees right, but they're not risk-basing their audits. And a lot of their audits are in areas that are very it's not a high-risk environment. Whereas the areas that are high-risk environment, they need to do more work in that. The other thing is that since 2015, since 2015 year, the number of audits being performed has decreased significantly. When they go out and do an audit, you might find this a little bit hard to believe, I did, that 69 employers, which they went out to do an audit of, 69 employers just said, no, we're not going to let you audit. And that was the end of it. Well, I mean, I can tell you, if my office goes out and audit and somebody tells me I'm not going to let you audit, that just raises my red flag, right? But so they have a process where if an employer says you can't audit, they can fine them $5,000. That's already in law, but they haven't done that. And part of the reason they haven't done that is they're not properly tracking their audits to see why an audit was stopped and that sort of thing. So they need to do a better job of that. The penalties in the law are not effective right now. Our state is the only state that says that the Workforce Commission has to send a warning letter out first before they issue a penalty for an employer who hasn't complied with the law. And then when you get to our penalty is a maximum of $1,500. We looked at some other states and they have penalties going all the way up to $50,000. One of the huge issues with misclassified employees is labor brokers. A labor broker is an employer who brings in to the state let's say a large number of employees. So a contractor needs workers. They go to a labor broker. The labor broker brings in 50 workers. And what's happening is the labor brokers are not complying with this rule of these people are employees, not contract laborers. And our Workforce Commission and our state laws aren't requiring the Workforce Commission to hold the employers accountable for what their labor brokers are doing. Now you might ask, well, why is all of that important? Well, it's all important because if you're a contract laborer, then you're not getting a W-2. You're not paying withholding taxes. So then you think about with all of our benefit programs, then that very same individual would certainly appear that they are eligible for the various programs that are based upon wages. So it's a huge problem for us, and it's something we really need to do something about. Got a few more seconds, so I'll start trying to close up on some things. Fiscal Administration, I know some of you have asked about that. Fiscal Administration is when the state kind of somewhat, we don't take over. What we do is, I chair the committee, the Fiscal Review Committee, and if a local municipality is basically financially not able to make their debt payments, not able to make pay their expenses, then Fiscal Review Committee will find someone to be the fiscal administrator, and then the court will appoint that individual as a fiscal administrator, and for all intensive purposes, they become the mayor and the board and what have you, and they have all the authority and all the power. And we have several entities that are under fiscal administration. My issue, or what I wanted to tell you today is we're at a point right now where we have many entities that are right at the brink of needing to be under fiscal administration. And so that's something we need to be looking out for. Wanted to tell you just briefly a few of the projects that will be coming out in the future. We're doing work right now on the Quality Jobs program. We're doing work on in DEQ on the hazardous waste sites and whether they have the funds. Have they been taking funds to clean those sites up? You might remember we did similar work in the Orphan well program several years ago. So we're looking at that. We're looking at, we recently looked at Baton Rouge's water aquifer and whether we're managing that properly. Now we're expanding that. We're looking across the state. So as a state, do we have a good plan to manage our water usage and our aquifers? We're looking at our workers' comp program and the amount of opioids that are being used and issued through that program. Here shortly, we're going to be looking at human trafficking and whether we as a state, are we doing enough in the area of human trafficking. We're looking at the sex offender databases all across our state to determine whether, our sex offender databases, are they accurate or are they not accurate? And in this legislative process, I always get more work to do every time they come to town, right? And so I've been asked to look at the Sewer Water Board out of New Orleans and look at their billing system. And I've been asked to look at the family leave policies of all our state agencies. Last year we looked at the sexual harassment policies. Now they want me to look at the family leave policies. And the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll let you ask all the questions you want to ask, is if you haven't received, somewhere on your table, I want you to pick up the little news release we issued, because I'm very proud of my organization. My performance audit section, which is, they do all of the economy and efficiency, looking at programs to see if they're operating properly. The NLPES, that's the National Legislative, I can't even say it. It's part of NCSL. And that organization gave my performance audit section 3 awards in 1 year, and that's like unheard of. And so just really proud of the work that they have done. So, all right, that probably primes you up good. What questions do you have? Yes, sir.
You mentioned municipal audits, and I know in the last few years you've all become you've asked for a much more detailed report of, as far as receipts and expenditures, going as far as every credit card receipt and so forth. And of course, that's the chagrin of a lot of small municipalities. But how effective has it been? How much of an increase have you seen in the number of deficiencies through these audits by asking for more information?
Okay, so the question is, in the last few years, my office has asked more of the entities it's primarily that our CPAs across the state are auditing, and what's been the impact of that. So let me tell you where that came from. What I realized several years ago is that a CPA audit is an audit of the financial statements. It's to determine whether those financial statements are fairly stated. But what we need in government is a lot more than that. We need to know that the controls are well-designed controls and they're effective controls. It's one thing to have the financial statements fairly stated, so the accounts receivable is accurate, all right? That's one thing. But you know as well as I know that when the clerk steals $5,000, then everybody in the town's upset about it. And so what we wanted to do, and what we have been doing, is asking the CPAs to do more work than what they've done in the past. And so we want them to look at those internal controls, such as budgeting, look at those internal controls over credit cards, over travel, over reimbursements, and any of maybe the riskier issues that we see. What has happened as a result is, I believe, that we're building better accounting infrastructure in all of our municipalities and local government as a result. It's going to take some time, and I know that some of the municipalities and some of the local government, they didn't like the fact that I was asking for more work, because that cost them more money. But I believe in the end, it's going to save us money, because it's going to save us, down the road by having better controls. So, yes, ma'am.
Fund ran out of money in January, and we know that the Jindal administration laid in in their second term tapped that fund or swept that fund quite a bit. Do you have any plans to go look at that fund and its efficiencies again?
Yes, so the question is, it's basically talking about the Orphan well project that we did years ago, and whether we have a plan to update that. So I think that was it 3 years ago? 3 years ago?
2014.
2014? Ooh, I'm getting old. All right. Yeah, what my office did was we went and looked at the Orphan, we went and looked at the hazardous sites caused by, drillings. And when they drill, at some point in time, the oil companies may leave that site, and what they leave is, they leave a hole, and they often leave equipment and that sort of thing, and it becomes hazardous to our environment. It becomes it's an eyesore for various property owners and that sort of thing. But it also can have a long-term effect by being dangerous for our water aquifer and those type of things. So the question we wanted to ask is, how well are we doing as a state in making sure that those sites are being cleaned up, and that there's funds set aside to clean up the ones that need to be cleaned up. At the time, I think the number was about 2,500 sites that we found that had been completely orphaned and not cleaned up. And I think we said there was about 10,000 more that could potentially go in that direction at some point in the future. And I know there's been lots of legislative interest over the last 2 years, and so as a result, I have communicated to the legislature that we will be updating that work over the next year to give them a new report. Yes, sir.
You mentioned I have provided access to records. The last 2 years, Senator John Milkovich has offered what he calls a Bill of Rights for certain occupational licenses, most notably medical and in particular that he's focused on. And during your testimony, both he stressed the fact that you reinforced the fact that you weren't being provided access to the records from the medical board. Has there been any change to that situation, and what would be your current assessment of your ability to oversee either the medical board or the state board of education?
Well, so the question is, it's primarily relating to the Board of Medical Examiners and whether or not we have access to those records, and maybe the broader question is general access to records for the auditor. Do I have access? And I can tell you that it seems to be coming up more often than not now that an auditee doesn't want to hand over records to the auditor. And over the last few years, we've had several instances of that. One was with the Board of Pharmacy, and one was the Board of Medical Examiners. And each one of those times, we've had to go to court, and each one of those times, the court has eventually said, give the auditor the records. So, we get there in the end through the court process, but unfortunately, that process takes a long time. And so, from my perspective, then there's a transparency problem here, and that the auditor's being hindered in doing the work that this office was supposed to do. So, what I'd love to see in the future is a strengthening of the audit law that would make it completely clear the auditor gets the records, which brings me back to the tax data. That's, again, my office on the tax data. My office right now has auditors in the Department of Revenue. We can look at tax data, and we can look at tax data all day long. What I can't do is I can't use the tax data I have in this hand and hand it over in this hand and use it for auditing of Medicaid. And that seems unbelievable that that's where we're at, but that's where we're at today. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, can you tell me how many municipalities are currently under a fiscal administrator? Roughly how many you think might be kind of on the brink, as you said? And if you maybe sort of characterize, is there something that all these towns have in common with sort of driving this?
Okay, so the question is, how many entities are under fiscal administration right now, and how many are kind of on the brink, and maybe what's the driver of that? The ones that are under fiscal administration today is the Madison Parish Hospital. That's up in Tallulah. Our town of St. Joseph is still under fiscal administration. The city of Jeanerette is under fiscal administration. And we have recently placed the town of Bogalusa under fiscal administration, town of Sterlington, Clayton, and Clarence. Now, some of those don't actually have a fiscal administrator today, We just recently had the court appoint someone for the city of Bogalusa, or it might be the town of Bogalusa now, town of Bogalusa. And we're close on Sterlington, and we're close on Clarence, and we're looking for someone on Clayton. And what we try to find is somebody that's primarily, we've looked for CPAs that have a lot of, good knowledge about local government and the particular type of local government that they're dealing with. So, for example, Madison Parish Hospital, that's the Tallulah Hospital, we found someone, a CPA that had basically done hospital work most of his career. How many are on the brink? I don't know the exact number. We have an early warning system we built in our office. We look at lots of metrics, and we kind of grade the entities. And my hope really is that as we perfect that metrics, that I can put that on my website so that everybody has access to that. And we're really close at getting that done right now. But what I'd really like to have is I'd like you and I'd like citizens to be able to go look up their town, their city, and compare it to others to determine just where they're at in being financially stable or not financially stable. And what's the driver of it? In several of these entities, well, in Madison Parish Hospital, the driver of that one was the previous executive director stole $5 million. That was a driver. All right. In some of the other ones, it's mismanagement. And sometimes sometimes it's gross mismanagement. Other times it's, you started out as a city and you were a city and you built a government for the size of a city, for example, Bogalusa, but you're no longer that population. Your population dropped from 24,000 to 12,000. You can't maintain government at the same level anymore. You have to do some changing. But I understand those who are elected in those positions, they have a hard time doing that because they tend to want to get reelected. So a fiscal administrator, they can step in without a whole lot of emotion, and they can make changes that need to be made. Yes, sir.
Let's continue on that line. The Fiscal Review Board in February named Bogalusa, Sterlington, Clayton, and Clarence, of which Bogalusa is the only one that has actually gotten a court order to get a fiscal administrator in, which happened in May after the town complained a long time about not getting any of those. Where are we with Sterlington, Clayton, and Clarence? Why does the committee say we're going to appoint a fiscal administrator and then wait months and months and months before that actually happens?
Great question. Great question. All right, so the question is, the Fiscal Review Committee, which I chair, and also sits on it, is the State Treasurer and the State Attorney General. The three of us, well, let me say the question. The question is, why does it take so long? Why does it take so long from the time we vote to the time where someone actually gets appointed to be the fiscal administrator? And I'm very thankful you asked the question because I forgot to address this. The issue comes down to a few things. One is qualifications of an individual willing to do the work, right? Not just everybody wants to go do that work. Whenever I sit with a potential fiscal administrator, I tell them, you're walking into a hostile environment day one, and you're going to leave with everyone hating you, right? At the end of the day, the citizens are not going to like you, and the town government's not going to like you, because you have to make those very hard decisions and do things to reduce expenditures and increase revenues to put the city or the town or the village back onto a good financial stable platform. So that's part of it. The second part of it is no individual is going to go do that for free. And so we're talking about entities. When you start talking about the town of Clarence, Clarence can't pay its bills now. That's why we put them in fiscal administration. So the governor has had to pay $5,000 a month for the last 6 months for a water manager to go in and manage their water system so that they have clean water to drink. And so they can't pay their bills now. They certainly can't pay a fiscal administrator. So I guess it was about 6-7 years ago, Senator Colomb passed a bill which put in place the Fiscal Administrator Revolving Loan Trust Fund. That was intended that we would fund it, put money in it, and then the town of Clarence, or town like the town of Clarence, would draw out of that fund while the fiscal administrator is doing the work, and then they'd be put on a payment schedule to pay the money back over time. Problem is, that fund never got funded, right? So you can't trust a fund that don't have any money in it, right? But this session, we did accomplish getting $450,000 appropriated into that fund. So now we have some cash that we can use to try to help some of these municipalities, towns, and villages. And so that I guess is a combination of the reasons. One is finding somebody willing that has the skill sets to do so, and the second is being able to pay them, and both of those have been a challenge. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Some weeks back, the state treasurer spoke and someone asked, can a city or town go bankrupt? He didn't seem to know the answer.
The question is, can a city or town go bankrupt? You know, I know we all know it was the city of Detroit went bankrupt, right? So I don't know about the state of the laws in the state of Louisiana. I have a hunch that we, the state, would not want a city or town to go bankrupt. And so I have a hunch that we would probably do everything we can to keep a city or town from going bankrupt. And I think that's why we have really such a strong audit law as far as having audits. We have a fiscal administration law, which many states do not have, the process that we have to be able to help them. Over the last, I guess, 7-8 years, my office we formed what's called the Center for Local Government Excellence, and basically that's a fancy word or fancy title we go out and hold conferences for the officials and the employees of all of these local government entities to teach them how to do it right. And so we're trying to address it and keep them from going bankrupt. But in answer to your question, I really don't know whether they can. I'm sure we would try not to. You have a follow-up? Yes, sir?
Isn't that a sort of welfare program for badly run towns?
Well, I guess the question is it that kind of a welfare program, badly run towns? I guess in a way it is. But we are talking about the citizens that live in that area. And so we're trying to do, from the auditor's perspective, I can tell you, I'm trying to do everything I can to try to help those governments not to get in that shape to where they can't provide clean water. And, what I find is this, and maybe in an answer to that question of why such a propensity or so many entities coming under fiscal administration, people will put up with a lot. If you're in your little local town or village, people will put up with a lot. They'll put up with bad government. They'll put up with a little bit of stealing here and there and like that. But people will not put up with unclean water, right? They're not going to put up with that, and they're not going to put up with a sewer system not working. And so when they get so bad that they can't no longer maintain their water systems, then that's when we're trying to look at it. Now, you might remember, I did a report a couple years ago. We saw that there are 850 individual water systems in Louisiana. That's a lot. And probably the answer is some type of combining of some of those systems. It is not efficient and probably not even probable to have a water system that only supplies water to 300 homes. You just can't really operate that type of a water system. So we need to go in some of those areas, and we need to start bringing them together, and so that they can have an economy of scale. Yes, sir.
Sir, on the misclassification of workers, that's some of the major employers in that region and the river parishes, like Turner Industries, Mr. Responding's Performance Systems, I think it is. Those are huge employers who are involved with a great deal of churn among turnarounds of refineries and petrochemical plants. Is that the source of your concern about misclassification, that there's just this huge amount of people flowing in and out of industrial facilities?
So the question is on the misclassified employees, is my concern about the industrial employers. And I would say no. I'll tell you, in our work and what we saw, the construction industry seems to be one area of major risk, and it primarily because of the individuals coming, influx of individuals after Katrina. I don't think this was really a huge problem before Katrina, but after the Katrina hurricane and all the work that's been done, this became more on the radar of a problem, and it's also because of the types of labor sometimes needed, unskilled or semi-skilled labor. So, you have sheetrock workers and those type of things where it's kind of a semi-skilled type of labor. And these labor brokers can bring in 50 to 100 individuals from out of state. The employer, this is a big problem. And let me tell you why it's a problem. It's a big problem to our contractors here in our state, because if you're doing it right and you're complying with the law, then your labor costs are going to be somewhere in the tune of 28 to 30% more than someone who is not doing it right, because you're paying your share of the FICA, you're putting them in a health program, you're paying all these different costs, whereas someone or an employer who doesn't do so, they're able to do so at a less cost. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem because the contractor who doesn't do it right can outbid or produce a lower bid than the one who is doing it right. And so I began hearing from contractors a couple of years ago that they were basically being squeezed out of the business in a very unfair way. And so that's why we went after looking at this whole process of misclassified employees. Yeah. Yes, sir. Get you next.
How much money has the state in general received back from people due to your office?
How much money has the state received back from people due to my office? Boy, that's a wide open question. I have no idea.
How do you measure your success?
How do I measure? Well, I tell you what, that's a good question. How do I measure my success? My office is the finder of fact, right? And we report the fact. I'd love to tell you that, I was an investigator for 18 years. That's what I did, fraud investigations. And, and as just as an individual, if I could do an investigation and bring someone to a courtroom or even have them confess before the courtroom, boy, I felt successful. But reality is, as the auditor, my job is to find the facts and report it. And I don't have any control of it after that. So we find, I guess we measure our success by picking the right subjects that we believe are important to our citizens, important to the quality of life in Louisiana, important to our legislature, and then going out and discerning the facts on those situations and reporting the facts so that those individuals who do take it from there can go and take it from there. So I guess that might be I don't know if that's a fair answer, but that's my best I can do. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add some information about Madison Parish Hospital, because they have gotten on a fiscal responsible path, and the fiscal administrator has done a great job there. In fact, the people in that service district just voted a tax for a new hospital there. So I didn't want to leave it on the table like they were in bad shape.
Oh.
They're in a lot better shape since y'all took control.
Okay, so somewhat the question is Madison Parish Hospital, and thank you for asking the question. So has that been a success? And maybe this helps out with the previous question. Has that been a success? Madison Parish Hospital, when we appointed the fiscal administrator, they were about $6 million in the hole. It looked like that building, that might be shuttered one day. And today, that hospital has about $10 million in cash. And they are in the midst of plans of building an entire new facility. So huge success. That is one of my success stories for the fiscal administration process is Madison Parish Hospital. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a process for the public to follow if they have ideas or projects in mind that they would like for your office to consider?
Okay, so the question is there a process to follow if a citizen or someone has, something in mind that they would like to my office, I guess, to look into the audit. And we do have a fraud hotline, which we get, primarily fraud, but we get a lot of also just good information from citizenry. And so anybody can go online and fill that out and submit it. Or we have in almost every well, I think it's required by law, in every municipality, every governmental building, they're supposed to have the poster that my office puts out, which gives the phone number to call to do exactly what you're talking about, so, yeah.
And then the selection process that your office goes through, as far as taking all the different potential projects, how does that?
Okay, so the question is, and how does my office select which projects we're going to look at? And I would tell you, some things that we do are by statute. You know, I have to audit every agency every year. I have to do a performance audit on every agency at least once, I'm gonna say at least, because I do it more often, at least once every 7 years. All right, when it gets into things like fraud or waste and abuse, there's more work than I can possibly do. So we try to prioritize it based upon, what the type of entity it is, who in the entity might be the culprit. If it's a clerk, that's one thing, but if it's the mayor, that's an entirely different thing. So we try to look at it that way. We try to look at, what's the impact on the citizens and, and those sorts of things. So, we kind of have an internal process that we go through, but certainly we can't do it all. So.
I think we have time for one more question.
Daryl, rumors were swirling that you were considering a run for a statewide elected office. Any truth to the rumors since qualifying comes up in August?
I have never heard the rumor that I was going to run for statewide office. And I can tell you that I am very fortunate to be a state auditor who does not have to run for office, right? And I would run from any other office. Perfectly happy with the one I have. I truly believe the legislative auditor position is probably the position in our state government that can have the most impact over a long period of time over all the other positions. So, yeah, no truth whatsoever. My second life is I'm a pastor of a church, and if I ever do anything else, I'm going to run straight to that. Not, yeah.